Hello folks, welcome to my YouTube channel, Watercolor Impressions. Since it's fall season in Ontario, the trees looks really magical, and this reference was taken near Unswell near Lions Lookout. If you get a chance, I highly recommend going and checking out this view, and it looks magical and magnificent. Before you go, hit the subscribe button so you guys can get weekly video update from our channel. And let's get started. When you try this painting and follow this tutorial, don't have any expectations once you start this painting, because this painting can be a little bit difficult for beginners, and I did have a little bit of difficulty when I tried to finish up this painting. It's kind of, for example, if you're hiking on a trail and you don't know the view or you're walking into unknown, but at the end of the day, once you finish the trail and the view looks amazing. So it's kind of anything when you paint, you shouldn't have any expectation when you paint. So just go with the flow and have some faith, and either the painting works, and it didn't. So when it comes to drawing, and the drawing can be quite simple. As you can see in the reference, there's only certain things we have to capture. The horizon is really easy to capture. It's at the top of the reference. And we have some midgrounds. There's few buildings, and there's the foreground buildings. So the foreground buildings are the Euro buildings. I want to make sure that I capture that. And there's also a road which also helps us to lead it. And I also put a little bit of water line for us. So I started with the sky. The sky, I'm going to keep it really weak. So I used a little bit of green and a little bit of cobalt blue in it. So there's a little bit of overcast. So as you can see, I took my little bit of orange I used cadmium orange for it, and I did a quiet wash with a lot of water in it, and I put a little bit of greens and reds, and I mix it. Even though in the reference the shapes look really silhouette, but I'm just going to make sure that there's a little bit of depth we can create it. So the way we can create depth is by changing the values. The values at the back looks weak. As it comes to the foreground, it's going to be getting stronger. So I'm using a lot of orange in my wash. So the reason being is, if you see this reference by squinting your eyes, there is a lot of orange all over this reference. So I'm just want to put down my base wash, but there's no logic to it. This is just to get me started and where everything goes. I'm blocking the roads as fast as I can, and you can see I also put a little bit of wash for the houses in the midground. But when it comes to the foreground, I'm going to make sure that leave some white bits for it. And I'm also adding some roof, and this also helps us to know where everything goes. So when you do this, you're thinking that you're creating a map for your painting, because we are arranging, painting in such a way that we can handle our values and we can put down our wash. So now let's put down our the basic wash for the water. So I'll create a gradient from top to bottom. At the bottom, I'll just increase my pigment consistency. So I let my wash dry for a bit, and I wet the paper at the top near the horizon. And I'm just going to put down another wash, and I'm just going to introduce green and red. You can see in the reference, it does look darker, but I'm going to make it blurry so that it goes in distance. I would have used a lot of blues in it, but I didn't. But I just want to make it blurry and goes in the distance. So I'll bring down this gradient by introducing a lot of greens and a lot of cadmium orange and a lot of cadmium red. Because you can see the fall colors in our reference, it kind of like varies from red to green and to yellow too. I'm also making sure and aware of my road, and I'm also being aware of my building. And as it comes to the foreground, I'm going to have a little bit of loose edge variation, because in distance the edges are blurry. In the midground, it kind of have a little bit of like sharper edges in our trees. It's the same thing. I'm going to introduce green, red, and I'll just bring it all the way to down. And you can see I'm also introducing a little bit of a darker green in the foreground to the midground, because that shows that there's a lot of value ranging from the stronger to the weaker value. So I did repeat the same step, and now let's add the dogs near the house. And this just to see where everything goes. Even though in the reference it looked different, but I changed in a way that it works for a composition. So now I'm introducing the mid-tone value for the mid-ground building, and I'm also making sure and telling myself not to go overboard with my values, because this as it comes to the foreground, the value is going to be stronger. In the mid-ground, it's going to be a little bit lighter, and in the distance, it's super light. And you can see wherever our house sits, I'm going to introduce a little bit of contrast using Cobalt Blue. And as soon as we add the shadows at the bottom of the tree, you can see it has the 3D look. I'm going to repeat the same step for the mid-ground trees and the foreground trees as well. And you can see, and everything looks green now, and it looks really flat. So the reason being is we just have one base color. Once we introduce the mid-tone and the shadow at the bottom of the trees, and everything will look 3D. So as a painter, we have to create an illusion that it have the volume in any kind of painting you do. So especially trees are really hard to do it, because the trees have a lot of shapes and variations in their edges and a lot of light coming through it. So I'm trying to do the exact same thing, and you can see wherever my house sits, I'm going to introduce a darker value, and it also helps to create a contrast, and our eyes goes to the where the contrast are. So as soon as we are introducing the mid-tone value and the darker tone at the bottom of the trees, you could see the old painting came alive, and you can see there's the 3D volume started appearing on the trees, and the light started appearing as well. I'll repeat this process till I can create 3D volume on all the trees from the midground to the foreground. For the background trees, I'm not going to do anything else. I'll just keep it simple as possible. And you can see in the reference there's a lot of variations, but we can't paint as it is, and it does take a lot of time to do it. So I kind of created an impression in such a way that which tells a story of where this is. So now let's focus on the second wash for the houses. And in the background or in the midground buildings, I'll keep it really simple. And you can also see there is some houses which doesn't exist in the midground, since I have a white paper left, so I just added a little bit of house in there. So the midground houses, I wouldn't put that much detail on it, whereas in the foreground houses, I spend a lot of time on it. I want to make sure that it reads well, because that also creates a little bit of perspective and enhances a little bit of depth in our painting as well. Because things in the foreground looks really sharp, and things in background looks less blurry, and that creates a little bit of perspective and depth and distance in our painting. So there is a lot of values in that building. So there is a mid-tone and a darker tone in there, so I added that. I want to make sure that it reads properly. And there's also a chimney at the top, and it also adds a little bit of detail on the house, and it instantly shows that it's a house. So there's a lot of windows in there, and I also made sure to block it. And if you see in my drawing template, or in the drawing when I drew, I added a little bit of a darker tone for the windows, and that will help us to know where I can put my value. And I'm also making up a lot of stuff in the foreground, and to create an illusion of details in there. So now let's do the water. So I'm going to do the second wash for the water. I wet the paper in the midground of the water. In the foreground, I'm going to introduce the darker value. So I'm going to introduce a little bit of a darker tone. I'm using a lot of burnt amber, neutral tint, and a little bit of green in it, and it's left over in my palette. And I'm just going to reflect the houses and a little bit of trees in my water. So as soon as I did that, I'm going to spray some water, so that gives a little bit of loose edges. And I'm also want to make sure that this is a softer reflections than a sharper reflections. So I'm going to take clean water, and I'm just going to bring some of the things down. And the balcony and the houses, I also take my clean brush and wipe out some of the washes. And I'm also putting a little bit of a white paint in it. And I also let it dry, and this is how it looks like. Even though it looked darker, you could see it came down to a nicer tone. So now it's about to bring a little bit of white paint and bring the eyelets, which we couldn't leave it when we started painting. So you can see as soon as we bring some eyelets, you can see there's a lot of shapes happening and appearing in our houses. and it also gives the illusion of 3D and volume in our houses as well. And when you use white paint, make sure to use it to minimum, because sometimes people can get overboard with it. I tell this in every painting I do. Personally, I also overdo it, and I try to reduce this as much as I can. And you can see the white bits what we left when we started painting. It gives that staccato look, and it creates this beautiful eyelets in there. And it's really hard to bring some of the eyelets back once we started painting. So I'm using a little bit of yellow in my brush with a little bit of white paint in it, and bringing some of the volumes in the brush so that it kind of creates this 3D volume in our trees. I'm highly stressing about the volume being on the trees because that gives the illusion of depth in our trees. And I'm also introducing a little bit of darker tone in the foreground, because the midground and the foreground having the same tone for the trees. So I'm just introducing a little bit of that thing in it. So I'm also introducing a little bit of the white pigments here and there. And now let's bring some of the eyelets back for the other trees as well. And now it's your turn. Take my drawing template and reference, and let's see what you can come up with. And I'm also splattering some white paints here and there. And I'll show the final painting, and I did like a little bit of tweaks here and there, and this is how it looks like. And it looks really good. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks again for watching this fall landscape video tutorial with me. Let me know what you guys think about this video in the comment section, and if you want me to cover any other subjects in watercolors, write me at watercolorimpressions@gmail.com or comment below. Before you go, hit the subscribe button so you guys can get weekly video updates from our channel. And please do share with your friends and family. And good luck with the painting, folks.